Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation, Dynamics 365 Best Practices on Solutions and Patches. Today's webinar is presented by Behringer Technology Group. We are located in Maple Shade, New Jersey, and also Vero Beach, Florida. So just a little information about myself. My name is Christina Bailey. I am a Dynamics 365 implementation specialist, and I work here at Behringer Technology Group. Just some fun facts. I have over 10 years of Microsoft Dynamics experience. I started on version 4.0. Currently a Dynamics 365 online user in version 9.1. At Behringer, we have a blog, and my blog handle is Dynamics Diva. So if you go to our blog, you can find a lot of blogs out there that I've written, and I'm actually in the process of working on a 12-part series surrounding best practices. So I am a best practice guru, and one of my favorite Dynamics technologies that's up and coming is the AI. I would really love to be able to dig more into that and learn a lot more about it. So for today's agenda, we're going to be looking at multi-organization environments, solutions and patches, deployments, and cloning. So to start us out, let's have a poll question. So if you guys can just answer the poll. Okay, so do you make configuration changes directly in production? Just curious to see if any of you do that. Okay, and great responses. It looks like no one does that, so that is awesome. Okay, so for those of you who have ever encountered this happening in the past, you know, some admins have the logic of, why should I have anything other than a production org? I just make all my changes in prod. I know what I'm doing. I rarely make mistakes. And when I do, users just click through the errors because they're used to it. So that's one administrator's logic. And then the flip side of that, of what that admin is hearing from their users, are a lot of complaints, annoying scripts, tabs on forms missing. There's always issues. It's so frustrating. You know, can't create new records that I could yesterday. You know, just a whole bunch of complaints coming in from your users, maybe even, you know, your bosses. You know, sales guys aren't getting their bonuses because they can't enter activities. You know, the CEO, they invested a lot of time and money into this product, and all users are doing are complaining. So these are just some pain points from the user point of view when you do try to make changes directly in production. Which your result is very frustrated end users and an angry boss or CEO. Okay, so let's talk about a multi-organization environment and what that looks like. So what are the benefits? You're not going to interrupt users while you're making changes. You have no downtime on your processes, your workflows, business rules, and so forth. Users will never be affected by any kind of mistakes or errors that you do because you're going to fully test everything that you do. And you have the ability to alpha, beta, and user test before going live. And your users can test in your dev or QA environment and provide you with feedback. So all of these benefits are going to enhance your end user adoption. So users love being able to be part of a system design and have a voice. And when users are excited about a change, especially one that they were involved with and had a hand with, they're going to talk to other users about it and get everybody excited. So this is just a little graphic here to show you the difference between single org versus a multiple organization. And these are just some of our recommendations for naming your orgs as well. So when you have one org, you're just going to have a production org, and it's going to be, your company name or company abbreviation. For us, we're Behringer Technology Group, so we use BTG. If you have two orgs, you would have a production and a sandbox, which would be your development environment. So we just recommend appending DEV, dev, to your org abbreviation. And then if you have three orgs, you would have your production, your company name, and then you would have a UAT or QA, so a user acceptance testing or a QA. So this is just a second sandbox that you have. And again, you could just append UAT or QA to your abbreviation. So this is what it would look like if you had three orgs. Okay, so let's take another poll. How many of you have a multi-organizational environment? Okay, so looks like a lot of you actually have two sandboxes. That's great. We also have one sandbox and we have an other. Okay. Alrighty, great responses. Okay, so that's good. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in how it coincides when you have the multiple sandboxes, the UAT or QA with the dev and the production, and what that should look like for deploying your solutions and patches. So back to this graphic we have with our 1, 2, 3 org model. So 2 sandboxes, 1 production, so forth. When you have a production, you have no patches or solutions. You have, because you're deploying not deploying, but you're making all your changes directly in the one environment that you have, which is production only. When you have 2 orgs, you have a production and a dev. You would use unmanaged solutions and patches because you kind of lose the ability to deploy a managed solution and do testing before you actually make it live. So that's why you would use unmanaged solutions and patches. If you have a 3 org environment with 2 sandboxes, then you have the ability to do all your development in your dev environment, and then you can use managed solutions and patches to deploy everything to a UAT or QA org. You can actually push it out to a UAT org. All your users can do their testing in that org, and you can make sure that that managed solution is correct before you take that managed solution and deploy it out to your production environment where everybody's working live. Okay. So to get started, if you guys are already using Dynamics, you're probably way beyond this point already. But in your sandbox, first time only, you want to create a publisher. And you would want to create a publisher with some sort of unique prefix. And I'm going to do a live demo of this so you can see what I'm talking about. But when you create a publisher and you give it a unique prefix, it assigns you an option set number. And that way, you'll never conflict with any other managed solutions, maybe that you install from third parties, or any other changes that you would implement. So then the first time you would create a solution using your publisher, and you would add components to that solution and make your changes, and then deploy them to either UAT or production. So when you create these solutions, you actually assign it a version number. And this is just our recommendation for versioning. This is what we use here. So the first number is your Dynamics release number. Right now we're in version 9. Maybe you're in version 8. When they go to the next version, we'll change that to 10. The next version is our minor release number. So, and we're going to see this happen live. So when you create all your patches and you clone a solution to the next solution, it automatically increments the second number for you. So this just means that this is our second release of our solution. And then the next number in the version number we use for our patch version. So the system automatically does this. When you clone a patch, it automatically increments that number for you. And then we use the last part of the version number as our release date in month, day, year format. So this just tells us that this solution 9.2.0.10.10.18 was released on October 10th, 2018. As far as our solution process, so again, this is the solution. So the first thing that you always want to do before you deploy a solution into your production environment is go into production and export your default solution just as a backup. Then you want to update the release date on your version in dev. You want to export that solution from dev as managed or unmanaged based on your organizational structure. Import that solution into production, and then publish your changes and test. And you just want to test, you're not user testing, but let's say you make a change to a form or you add some fields. You just want to open that form in production and make sure those fields are there. Okay. So having 3 orgs and deploying managed solutions patches is definitely ideal. You can't inadvertently change managed components directly in UAT or production. And managed solutions are much easier to uninstall or roll back from. So I don't know if any of you use unmanaged solutions. If you've ever tried to undo an unmanaged solution, you have to go through and delete every single component piece by piece in order to uninstall that from an organization. Whereas when you use managed solutions, all you have to do is delete the solution and it uninstalls everything that's part of that solution. Okay, so solutions and patches. For an unmanaged, a 2-org model, you have your dev and your production. So dev, the system is used for developing, alpha, beta, and user acceptance testing for all customizations. And then production, this is your live system. So at this point, all testing should have been completed in dev, and a backup should have been done before installing any solutions or patches. Okay, and then a 3-org model. So we just add the middle UAT. So we have our dev, which is it's going to be an unmanaged solution. So this system is used for developing alpha, beta testing for all customizations. And then we have our UAT, where we're going to push a managed solution. So we're going to take the solution from dev and export it as a managed solution to import it into UAT. And that's where all of the user acceptance testing is going to happen. And then once everybody says everything's okay and your managed solution is exactly the way everybody wants it, then you're going to export that managed solution and import it into production. Okay, so let's do a quick demo here. We're going to be using a 2-organizational environment, but I am going to point out, where you would select to export something as managed versus unmanaged. So we're just going to walk through creating a publisher, creating a solution, and then deploying it to production. So I have my sandbox system. And if I come in here, I go to settings and then customizations. I see I have an option here for publishers. So if I come in here, and I've already created my Behringer publisher, and let's just take a look at that real quick. So I just name it, after our company, Behringer Technology Group, and then our prefix is BTG. So anytime you create new fields or new entities, it's always going to preface it with that prefix. So if you haven't set up a publisher, anything you create, it's just going to use the default new underscore as the prefix for all of your custom items, all your any fields or any entities you make. They're all going to start with new underscore. So creating a new publisher is very easy. You just come to the settings, customizations, publisher, and say new. And then you would just give your publisher a display name. And then a prefix. And it can be more than 3 characters. And then once you assign it a prefix, it's going to automatically assign you an option value number. So if you've ever created option sets in Dynamics, you'll notice they start with that. If you use the new underscore, it's like 10,000, or it's a really long number. And yes, you have the ability to override that. You can change it to something else. But when you use a publisher, it's nice because it assigns you a unique value. So you're never going to butt heads against another publisher's option set. You'll always be able to coexist. And then if you want, you can put your contact details. So if you are someone that's developing third-party solutions and pushing them out to the marketplace, you may want to put that information in your publisher so people know how to get in contact with you. And then you just save and close your publisher. And now when you create solutions, you'll be able to select that new publisher from the list. So if I go back to customizations, I have my solution. So I've already created a solution, a base solution in here and a patch already. But just to give you an idea of what we do. So my version of my first customization was, 0.0 because it was my first solution, and then the date. And this just represents that I deployed this today. And then from my solution, I've already cloned a patch. So we'll talk about that in the next demo. But right now we're just looking at the solution. So my base solution is here. And this is going to contain all of my entities. And so because I've already cloned a patch for my solution, I can't really edit anything in here. But this is going to contain, everything that you included in your first solution push out. But let me just create a new one here so I can show you the different components. So this is my demo test, and then my publisher. So if I select my publisher here, see how I have that demo test publisher that I just created? And then I can give it a version number. So we're going to just start with same thing, 9.0.0 and then 613. Then I can save. Okay, so now it's asking me to add my components. And so here's all my available components that I can add. I'm just going to add something small. So I'll just add a couple security roles. Okay. So when I'm ready, I'm just going to export my solution. So let's close out of here. So I can export this just by selecting it and clicking export. Okay, so this is where you would select manage or unmanaged. So I only have 2 organizations for this demo. I have a dev and I have a production. So I'm always going to use an unmanaged solution. So if you had a 3-organization environment, you would use the managed option. So you select this at the time that you export your solution. And if you forget, just don't import your solution, just re-export it. Okay. So that's going to export. So let me pop over into my production real quick. So if I come in here and if I go to publishers, I'm going to see my Behringer publisher, but I'm not going to see my demo publisher because that doesn't exist in here yet because I haven't installed that solution yet. So if I go into solutions, in here, you'll see the same thing you saw in dev, because I've actually deployed everything from dev into production that I have. Okay, so my export's complete. So I just want to come up here. So now I want to import that solution in here. So I'm going to click import, and I'm going to select my file, demo test, and then I can say next. So if there were any workflows or any kind of processes that were part of my solution, at this point, it's going to ask me, do I want to enable those? Do I want to make them activated? And most of the time, you're going to say yes, because when you're working with workflows and so forth, when you're importing them into production, you're going to definitely want to make them live right away. And that's one of the nice things about using solutions and patches, is that when you do deploy those workflows, there's no downtime. So it keeps it enabled, it keeps users working. So if you do have to get some kind of hot patch out in the middle of the day when users are working, there's going to be, minimal interference as long as that patch is small. Okay, so let's import this. Okay, and while that's working, there is just one thing I wanted to point out that I forgot to point out back here. I'm going to open up my solution again. So one thing, when you're adding components to your solution, specifically entities, so let me just add an existing entity, and I'll just pick, we'll pick activity. So one of the best practices that we follow, that I recommend to anyone that uses solutions and patches, when you're working with entities, only add the items to the solution that you need to work with. You never want to add all assets, because this is going to add everything, every view, every chart, field, everything. It's going to add everything to my solution for the activity entity. You only want to add the items that you specifically want to work with. Now, when you're creating a custom entity, the first time you create that entity, it's going to, by default, include everything. And there's no way around that, because you have to include everything. But as you start using patches and just making minor changes to that custom entity, then you just have to include the specific key items just that you're working with. And then the other part is include entity metadata. So I'm going to show you what this is in a second. You only want to include this if you need to include it. So I'm going to uncheck this. So I'm actually, let me just pick a view here. Pick my activities and say finish. So this is going to add the activity entity to my solution. And if I expand it over here, I can see all the parts of the activity. So if I just click on activity, this is my entity metadata. So all the information on here is, what they're talking about when they talk about including the entity metadata. So if I'm not making changes to this, I don't want to include that as part of my solution. So I want to make sure I uncheck that box. Now, a lot of times you're moving pretty quickly and you might forget to uncheck that box. So it's very easy to go back and change that. You don't have to remove the activity entity from your solution to change that. All you have to do is say add subcomponents, and it's going to bring that box back up for you. And then you would be able to uncheck that and then click finish. So that would not include that entity metadata with that entity in your solution. Okay, let's go back into our, okay. So my import's completed. And if I get any error messages, they're going to show up over here. So there's no errors, there's no warnings, nothing. Everything completed successfully. But if there were any errors or warnings, you would see them here under detail. And you also have the ability to download a log file. So, some of our solutions are very large. So this goes on for pages and pages and pages. And yes, you can sort by the detail to try to find your errors, but sometimes it gets very tedious and difficult. So it's a lot easier if you download this log file. It's just a text file, an XML file actually, but you can look at it in, in a XML editor or just in a notepad editor if you want to, and it'll give you some more information on the errors to just make it a little bit easier to read it if you have a lot of pages in here. And as we went through this demo, the one thing that I did not do was export my default solution first before I imported my solution. So if you're not familiar with that, if I go back to settings and customizations, so we've been working in solutions, but if you click on this customize the system option, so this takes you into what's called your default solution. So this is your system's default solution. I'm in production, so this is my production default solution. And this actually includes everything about all of your components. And you see here it's called the default solution. So this includes everything. If I expand my entities, it's going to be every single entity that's in my system. All of the plugin assemblies, all my global option sets, everything. So this includes system items, managed items, as well as anything custom that you've added or any third-party plugins that you've installed. So when I say you want to export the default solution before you make any changes, this is what I'm talking about. So you can just export the solution by clicking this, and it'll export it for you. It does take a while, so you can click export solution and then go work on something else that you were working on, or work on your building your solution in dev or whatever. But you don't actually have to sit here and watch it export. You can just click it and then go do something else. Okay. So let's see. And then the last step. So once I've imported my solution in here, if I did make any changes, let's say I added entities, and I made changes to forms and so forth, I would have to come in here and publish those entities. And one thing we do recommend is publishing things, within your solution only. You want to stay away from publishing all customizations, especially if you have multiple developers. If you have multiple developers working in your system, you don't want to publish changes that they've made that maybe aren't ready for publishing. So you always want to just publish things individually. Okay, let's switch back over to our PowerPoints. So another poll question coming up here. So when adding entities to a solution, do you always add metadata in all assets? Okay, it looks like a lot of you don't, so that's good. For those of you that do, just be aware when you're adding everything, you may be adding too much, and it's going to slow down your process. So, you saw me export a solution and import it. It was very quick because it only had a few components in it. But when you start modifying a lot of different entities and you're adding every single item from all of those entities in your solution or in your patch, it's really going to take a long time to export that solution, and it's going to take that same amount of time to import it, if not more. So you just want to be aware of that. You want to make your solutions and patches as small as you possibly can. Okay, so next we're going to talk about patches. So patches provide an easy way to segment customizations for new requests or bug fixes. You can deploy a patch for new functionality after testing, even if previous patches haven't been deployed yet. So again, if you have more than one system administrator, you have multiple people, working with patches, you can finish your part and you can push your patch out, and you might be patch number 4, and patch number 2 and 3 don't have to be deployed yet in order for you to deploy your patch. However, if you were all working in a solution and not using patches, then you would have to wait for everyone to be done before you could deploy that solution. And patches are only going to contain components that you are modifying, so they're going to be more lightweight than your full solution. So if you consider, you build your solution, you have your brand new system, you build your solution in Sandbox, you make all your configuration changes that you want to make, you deploy that to production. After a week or so, people want to start making changes or, want different enhancements done. If you go back and just modify those things in that big solution, because that solution can get pretty big if you think about it, now you have to export that whole solution again and import it into production, and that's going to take a lot of time. And there's a lot of stuff in there that you don't really have to deploy because it's already in production. You haven't made a change to it. So that's why patches are nice. So if somebody just wants to add a field to a form, you can just clone a patch. You can add the form to the patch, add the new field, and those are the only 2 components that you have to push out to production in that patch. You don't need all of those other items in that patch or solution, or in the patch. So we talked about the versioning for the solution. So this is our recommendation for versioning for the patches. So again, our major and minor release numbers, the first 2 numbers are going to stay the same for all of your patches because they're all part of that base solution. So if your solution was 9.2.0 point whatever the release date was, all of your patches are going to start with 9.2 as well. So you're going to have 9.2, and this is just an example. This is going to be your 3rd patch. So that's what the 3 represents. And this number will auto increment as you clone patches from your base solution. So you don't even have to change this. It'll just automatically increment to the next number for you. And then the release date, this just tells you that it was released on April 9th, 2019. Okay, so your patch process, again, recommend export your default solution from prod just as a backup. You want to update the release date on your version in dev. So again, you might have cloned a patch 3 weeks ago and you've just been working on different components for 3 weeks. So now I'm ready to deploy my patch to production. The first thing I want to do is just go into my patch in dev, change that date so I have instant visibility of the date that patch was released. Export your patch from dev as managed or unmanaged. Import it into production, and then publish your changes and just check to make sure that they're there. So let's look at what that looks like. So I'm going to go back to my dev. So as I mentioned, here's my BTG customizations. I've already cloned 1 patch that I've already deployed to production. And we kind of recommend that you want to come up with some sort of naming convention for your patches. For us, we have some sort of ticket, some sort of project, some kind of request, an issue. Something has come in that says, please make this change. So for all of our patches, we use that ticket number and just a little description of what that is. And this helps us keep our patches organized. And it also gives us a reference if we want more information. So, this is a request ticket number, whatever, add type to community. So we have a custom entity called community, and we wanted to add a type to that community. So that's what this patch represents. If I needed to get more information, I could go back to this request ticket, in our ticket system and look it up, and I could see, all the history around that ticket. So cloning a patch is very simple. You just select your base solution and you click clone a patch. And then it asks you for the display name. So again, maybe I have a service ticket or a bug ticket. Number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then maybe just a little description of what that is. Problem let's say type field not showing on form. Okay. And then my version number. So like I said, it increments to the next number. I already have a patch with 1, so this is going to automatically increment to 2. And then the last part of my version number, we use the date, so that's going to be 06/13/19. Okay, and then I just hit save. So now I have my patch. And if I open it up, it has nothing in it. So what happened with this was someone asked to add type to community. So let me just pop into this patch real quick. And let me open it up here. So we have the community entity. There's no forms in here. If I go to fields, okay, I have a field, I have a type field. So what it looks like to me is that someone added the type field and they never actually added it to the form. So that's a problem, you know. So that's where the service ticket came from. So the type field isn't showing on the form. Okay, just looks like somebody forgot to add it to the form. So I've just cloned my patch. Here's my patch number 2. I'm going to go to entities, and I'm going to say add existing entity, and I'm going to look for that community entity. There we go. And I'm going to say okay. So it's checking these for me automatically. I'm going to uncheck them. And the only thing I really need is the form. I just need to add that type field to the form, so I don't really need anything else. And I'm going to add it to the main form and the quick view form. So I'm going to select both of those. I don't need any views or charts or anything like that at this point. So I'm just going to say finish. Okay, so it's always going to ask you, well, it's not always going to ask you, but it's going to say, you know, there's missing components. Do you want to add them? So when this pop-up box comes up, you always want to check this list, but you're usually going to want to say no, do not include required components. Most likely, these components should already be in your production system or in your, you know, in the next system, because they should have been part of the solution or they should have been part of a previous patch. So you're going to want to say no, because for some things, this list can get really long. I mean, imagine if you had to make a change to the system user entity and you know, we're adding that entity in here in your solution. There's going to be a whole lot of, you know, required components in this list. So all I recommend is that you just kind of take a glance, take a quick look at this list, and if anything pops out at you, you know, oh, you know what, I know that's not in production yet, I'm going to have to add that part. So you still want to say no, and then just take note of whatever that item was, and then after you click OK here and get back to your solution, then you can just go in and add that single component manually. Okay. So for community, I'm going to go into my forms. I'll do my information form first. So I'm just going to pop the type field on here. I'm just going to save and close. I could publish it at that point, but I'm going to wait. And then my quick view form, same thing. I want to pop the type on here, save and close. So I could have clicked publish on both of those, but I just find it easier to come back here to entities, select it here, and publish that way. So now that's going to publish all my changes for that entity. Okay. So from here, I can actually export the solution right from here. I have an option up here in the ribbon. So I'm just going to say export solution. I'm going to say next. Okay, so it's telling me that things are missing. If these are not in my target system, then the import's going to fail. So again, just take a look at the list. I know these things are in my target system, so that's okay. I'm going to say next. If they weren't, again, I would have to hit cancel and go back and add them manually to my patch. Okay, next. Managed, unmanaged, we're just 2 organizations, so I'm going to use unmanaged, then export. And that should be pretty quick. So there we go. There's my customizations. I'm going to close this. And then in production, again, I would export my default solution. And then I would import my patch. Next, import. So this is actually pretty quick because it's just those two forms. That's the only thing that is in my solution at this time. Okay. So I'm going to get my report completed successfully. So I don't have any errors. There's nothing really to look at here. So I'm just going to close out of this. And now I see my patch in here. So I'm just going to click on that to open it up. And then I'm going to publish my entity. So now those changes are going to be on that form in production. And again, I would just want to just check quick to make sure. I don't think I actually never added it to show under any of these areas. So I'm just going to go into advanced find real quick. New community. There we go. And of course, I never actually tested this in dev, which, I should have done that as well. Tested it, got my users to sign off on it before I deployed it to production. But for the sake of a 1-hour demo, I just wanted to show you how you deploy the patch. Okay. So I'm going to go back into my sandbox and then my dev. And this is something that you can decide as an administrator how you want to manage this. You might, maybe after you get so many patches, you want to roll up your solution back to the main solution. That's something that you can kind of get a gauge on. Usually for us, we wait until the next Dynamics major release. So we might have 20 patches in our organization. And then they come out with the next version. So 9 or 8 to 9, and then 9, whenever 10 comes out, we would do this. But maybe you have to do it more often. Maybe you want to set it up on a monthly schedule or, a 6-month cycle, whatever you want to do, you can just kind of think about what that would look like for your organization. But when it comes time to roll up all your patches to the next solution, you just come into your solutions and then you just say clone solution. So I'm going to click clone solution. And what it's going to do, so you see I have 2 patches out here for the solution. So it's going to take my solution, take the patches, roll everything up into a new solution. So the reason we do that for the next major upgrade, so now we're back to working in one solution with all of our components. We can test, we can upgrade our dev org. We can test all the new functionality and the new version, make sure everything works properly. If it doesn't work properly, we update the component in the solution so that it works properly, make whatever changes we need to make. And then once we upgrade our production organization, then all we have to do is take that solution from our dev, 10.0 or 10.1.0, whatever the date is, and deploy that solution from our dev org into our production org that was just upgraded. Now, one thing you'll notice when you come in here, you don't have the ability to change that last number in here, and that's okay. So I'm going to clone my solution. It's going to roll everything up into my new VPG customizations with the 9.1. Again, if it was the next version, I would change this to 10, but we're still in version 9. So I'm going to leave that a 9. I'm going to say save. And what you're going to see here is all those patches went away. So all my patches are gone. And now I'm back to my single solution. And if I go in here, I'm not going to get that error message or warning message at the top that says I can't make any changes in here. So now I'm back to one solution. I have no patches from the solution, so I can make all my changes in here. But I had mentioned about the version number, so I wasn't able to change that version number when I was cloning the solution, but I can just easily come in here and change it here. Or I can leave it as a 0 until I'm ready to deploy it, at which point I would put that date in, because it is a big solution. I have a lot of testing to do, a lot of changes to make, so I might not actually deploy this for another month. So next month when I'm ready to deploy it, I would just come in, put 07/13/19 in, and then deploy it to production. And then from here, again, you can just start cloning patches again and so forth and so on. And then when you're ready, I'm sorry, you wouldn't start cloning patches yet, but you would deploy the solution first. So you would, once you do all your testing, you would deploy that base solution back to production. So then that's going to roll everything up in production as well. And then you would start cloning your patches, creating patches, and deploying your patches for your next solution version. Okay, so just to kind of look at everything overall, we have our base solution deployment. You clone your patch. You're going to export your default solution from prod. You're going to deploy your patch. You're going to continue to cloning patches as needed. You're going to continue exporting your default solution as a backup, and then you're going to continue deploying patches as needed, and then you're going to clone your solution to roll up all your patches, and you're going to start the process all over again. You're going to do your base solution deployment, clone your patches, and so on. So another poll question coming up here. Just curious, how many of you currently use patches? Okay. So it looks like some of you use them. That's great. Some of you don't. Hopefully you start using them. Okay. So for the last part, I just kind of want to outline some of the best practices surrounding, surrounding using your solutions and patches. So again, having the 3 orgs and deploying managed solutions is ideal because you can't accidentally change anything directly in UAT or prod. And again, managed solutions are much easier to uninstall and roll back from. And you always want to export your default solution just as a backup from production prior to installing any new solutions or patches. When adding components to a solution or patch, you only want to add the components that are required for the configuration you're working on. You don't want to add anything extra to add more overhead. You don't want to include metadata unless you absolutely have to. You do not want to add all assets. Again, if you're creating a custom entity, it's going to add everything by default the first time, and that needs to be there. So, when you're creating a brand new entity, it needs to add all the assets for that first deployment. But then going forward, as you make changes, you just need to pick and choose the components that you need. When you're asked to include missing required components, you first want to review the list. You don't want to say yes and have it automatically add everything to the solution for you. You want to manually add those things as needed. When deploying workflows, you want to be aware that in the target system, the workflow owner will be the user doing the deployment. So if you have an admin account, if you're not familiar with workflows, if a workflow owner, if their password expires, that workflow is going to start failing. So with one of the best practices surrounding workflows is you want to have your workflow owner be like a system administrator account, maybe with a password that doesn't expire, or someone that regularly changes their password, that it doesn't ever become deactivated. So when you're deploying patches or solutions, you want to make sure that you're deploying the patch or the solution as the workflow owner when you have workflows involved, because once you deploy that patch into your source system, it's going to update the owner of the workflow to whoever the user is deploying that patch or solution. And then you want to merge patches and solutions when a new major version is released or on a schedule that your company deems suitable. Okay, so that's all I have for today. If anybody has any questions, we do have about 10 more minutes that I can answer some questions. But thank you for attending. So one of the things we're offering today is a solution consolidation evaluation. So if you have a lot of solutions in your system right now because you're not using patches, you can go ahead and send an email to sales@behringer.net. The email address is down here on this slide. And this will be free to the first 5 attendees to request an evaluation by sending an email to our sales department. And just mention this webinar, that you attended the webinar today, and let them know that you're interested in having us look at your solutions. And we'll do an evaluation of it and let you know what we can do for you. But does anybody have any questions? If you do, you can just go ahead and type them in the chat. Okay, somebody asked about why deploy unmanaged for 2-org system. So once you deploy a managed solution, so when you have a 3-organizational system and you have an unmanaged solution in dev, that's where you do all your development, you deploy that to your UAT or QA as a managed. It gives you a place to test that managed solution. And then you can do all your testing in UAT. And then if something is majorly wrong, you can actually roll back your production to your UAT, because remember, the managed solution in your UAT and production. So you have the ability to take your production and make a copy of that and overwrite your UAT with what your production looks like, to overwrite maybe a mistake or whatever from that managed solution. When you have a 2-organizational environment, you lose the ability to do that. So if you had an unmanaged solution in your sandbox and you deployed it to production as a managed solution, you can't roll back production to your sandbox anymore, because it's a managed solution. So that's why when you only have 2 organizations, you have to use unmanaged from one to the other. Will the available presentation? Yes, I will make sure that it is. I'll make sure that you guys can get a copy of this. If not, just send us an email and we can email it out to you individually. Let's see, some components are not coming up with a managed patch. Is there? Not able to see this whole question that somebody asked. Here it is, some components are not. Okay, let's see. Okay, so think someone's asking, some components are not coming up with a managed patch. So are you saying that you can still, yes, there are going to be some things, even though you put them as part of a managed patch, that you are going to still be able to edit in production. And that is a problem, and I don't have a workaround for that. I'm sorry. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I thank you all for attending today. And again, if you have any questions, just please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is up on the screen. And you can also visit our website. Again, we have some great blogs out there. So hopefully we will hear from you soon. Thanks again. Have a great day.